witching hour, so we will call our meeting to order, and I'll turn it over to Manager Watson.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, I really appreciate you being here today for a few hours for this budget workshop. As we are all aware, this year has been unusual given the COVID-19 pandemic. Staff has worked to get our budget recommendation together, and we will be providing that to you at the June 1st board meeting. Today you're going to get a preview of a few components of the recommendation, and we hope you will find it useful, and also take this opportunity to ask questions regarding the items presented and other items that you may be interested in. Today you'll be getting an overview of the revenues and expenditure numbers utilized for building the manager's recommended budget. Additionally, you will get a brief presentation on the county's children's group home, facility operations update, our community partners funding process, and a brief amount of information on the Union County Public School budget request. Without providing the entire county manager's recommended budget today, I do want to let you know that I will not be able to provide a recommendation that funds all requested items for county operations or any of our funding partners. I remain committed to a no tax increase recommendation, excluding the new fire tax strategy that we're all aware of, and my budget will convey that. My budget message will also include information that informs the board regarding unfunded items that are priorities, and lay out for you how increased revenue would be allocated if, and I say only if, there's an uptick which allows us to see greater than expected sales tax growth. I do want to say a little bit about the Union County Public Schools budget request that was received last Thursday. You have a copy of the request, or we have a copy of that request for you to take with you and review. I would like to say that we were surprised by the request for a tax rate increase given the current economic circumstance. My recommendation for the Union County Public Schools funding will include an appropriation that balances the growth in our property tax base with the anticipated loss of sales tax revenue. It will be in line with the percentage growth that is being recommended for general county operations, which is fair and equitable given these unprecedented times that we're currently experiencing. You're going to recognize through Blake's presentation this morning that we are changing our language around education funding. Blake will provide an overview of education funding that includes South Piedmont Community College, Union County Public Schools, and the debt service that is attributable to both of those organizations. I believe it's important that we think about education funding not only as a K through 12 funding opportunity, but also include the valuable investments that are made in our local community college. You are also going to see a change in how we capture the county's tax rate and how we present that information. There is only one tax rate. This is reflected in the North Carolina Department of Revenue reports and their materials, and it looks at the county tax rate as one. I believe the way we got to a reference point of multiple rates in Union County was a product of previous issues and circumstances. I'm sure at the time those made sense and needed to be more explicit about the funding percentage on each for each organization and split the rate out that way. However, I believe it's come to a point where it's created confusion as well as expectations that are really unnecessary. You will see in the presentation and in my recommended budget the overall county tax rate and expense categories both broken out by education funding fire funding, emergency medical services. You will see the new fire tax districts delineated separately as is appropriate. Blake will begin our time today with an overview of items, some that you've seen before, that are important to a foundation for the fiscal year 2021 recommended budget. And with that, I'll turn it over to Blake.
Thank you. Thank you, Manager Watson, Chairman Simpson, and members of the board. It's my pleasure to be with you today and to kick off this budget workshop and share some key important information that will drive decision during this budget process. My goal today is to put some information in front of you that will inform the eventual budget recommendation from County Manager Watson, with the goal of getting some direction from you if there's anything that you see that's misaligned to your strategic vision for this year, or anywhere that you would like us to provide some more information, some more focus, to change course. This is a great time to let us know that before we get to the end of the process. June 1st is coming very soon. That's the date we have scheduled to recommend the proposed budget to you. So any information we can get from you as a board between now and then will help us tremendously in making final decisions, printing reports, and also finishing the budget document to deliver to you in anticipation of that meeting on the 1st. So I wanted to put some key players in front of you today that are major drivers for our budget process. Facilities is a great partner in the budget process. They're a very important internal service provider and budget driver. They're connected to our CIP process, our debt program, bond issuance with new buildings. And one thing that we're seeing this year that we're going to be focusing on here and going forward are growing operational costs for buildings coming online. We know we have a few buildings coming online in FY21, and then we have some buildings that will be coming on FY22 into 23, the emergency services building and also the sheriff's admin building. So those are key concepts we want to get in front of you and get some information if there's anything that you'd like us to do differently than we're on course to do. Also, we've invited Ashley Lance, Director of Social Services today. There's an interesting opportunity with the state to take over the group home, enter into a long-term lease for the youth group home we have here in the county. She's going to share some information with that. And I'd like to commend Ashley and her staff for the work they're doing in response to the downturn in the economy. Because of the pandemic, we know that social services play a key role in that safety net in the community for folks that have found themselves unemployed or in other need of help. They're doing a great job handling that service demand. And then when Ashley's done, I believe we'll take a quick break and reconvene. When we come back, I'll share with you a preview and update on the FY21 budget process, the work that we've done to date, and put some questions in front of you, some concepts. And if there's anything that you would like to have a refined point on, some more information on, like us to focus on a little bit more during the proposed budget presentation on the 1st, please let us know that, and we'll be happy to respond in kind. We want to represent your vision for the community in this budget process, so we're happy to receive that information. And with that, thank you, and I'll invite Chris to come up and Jeff to bring the presentation.
As Chris is getting set up, I'm going to give y'all a copy of the presentation. This presentation, as Blake kind of alluded to, is one that's going to share a little bit of what facilities has been involved with over the past year, thanks to the funding levels that y'all provided us. And you'll see some buckets that are addressed in there. And we're also going to be sharing with you, moving forward into this next year and the next budget cycle, where we plan to go with regard to those buckets of funding. Chris, I will tell you right now, is critical to that process. He's done an outstanding job for us in organizing and putting things together, and I think you'll see that in this presentation. And our staff as well has done a great job of implementing. So, Chris, we'll go ahead and get started.
All right. Good morning, Commissioners, Manager Watson, and leadership team. I appreciate the opportunity to share an update on our facility CIP program. I've got a couple things I want to talk about. First, I think it's important because we had a new model last year we brought to the board, and you supported that model. We want to talk a little bit about how we developed that, really quickly about that, and then show some success stories, because I think that's an important part of what we're trying to accomplish. What are we doing good that's benefiting our divisions, our departments, and our community. Then we'll move to fiscal year 2021, look at our funding models, and there's a slight change to it, and then show some sample projects that are related to that 21 CIP. So to kind of recap last year when we talked about this new model, some of our goals, what were our goals for that model? Really, it's about reducing backlog of our deferred maintenance. And probably more importantly, is to reduce or eliminate the growth or continued growth of deferred maintenance. That allows us to improve our facility condition index, which is one of the industry standards to measure how effective you're utilizing resources that are targeted at facilities improvements. We also, that model allows us to support any projects that are related to program improvements, also space needs and growth models allow us to enter projects into there. And also, I think another important part is allowing us to develop a consistent and sustainable level of funding in order to accomplish all those goals. And so we did that last year, presented to the board, and identified those kind of level funding, annual level funding for each of those, as Jeff said, buckets. So what are the buckets? So last year we identified those 3 buckets, are kind of industry standard buckets. The first is operating capital, second is facilities repair and renovation, and the last are major capital. Operating capital, basically those smaller type projects that are less than $100,000. Facilities repair and renovation are ramping up a little bit into the $100,000 to $300,000 projects, and then major capital are those that are over $300,000. Operating capital are really kind of small projects. You can think of them that way, is that you've got small equipment replacements, small office renovations, some small carpet areas, some painting, moving to facilities repair and renovation, ramp it up a little bit, more major equipment replacements, wholesale renovations of office suites, if you're going to do complete building control change-outs in a building, and potentially some generators, depending on size generators. And then major capital, usually we're talking about new buildings, big comprehensive renovations, even to the point if you've got major roofs, we can lump those into a major capital bucket. So how about some success stories from last year? These are just a list of some of the projects. We want to show you some pictures, let you see kind of the impact of some of these projects made last year. So first, one of the operating capital, these are small jobs. You can see we did some paving at Cane Creek. We did basically repave the main entrance and a lot that's in the back or the rear at the very end of this road. You can see striping and some speed devices. So really, if you've been there before, you saw pavement broken up and all that. So very good project there. Next, another small project, group home fencing. That required some lot clearing and things. Now you'll hear that we're going to potentially lease that out. We didn't know that when we did this project, but
Still necessary.
yeah, still necessary. This one of the problems related to that is that there's some homeless population that's not far from this facility, and they do some walkthroughs through the property. And so while it seems like a small, kind of minimal impact project, it actually has a large impact for safety and security on that site for the group home. Another project that's in the operating capital bucket, We did some improvements over at Patton Avenue. The old existing sign shop, we renovated that in order to allow our fleet services to start doing tire service work. Basically did new flooring systems, epoxy-based system, new lights, new paint, bought equipment, installed the equipment. So now the county is able to do tire service in that facility and avoid pretty significant cost in outsourcing tire services. Next project is over at Farmers Market. We renovated basically an empty spot. The fire marshal's office was running out of room, or had run out of room, and they were on top of each other on the 8th floor. And we renovated this space, which included some office reconfiguration, taking some walls out, new lighting, new ceiling, carpet cleaning. Actually, carpet was in pretty good shape. We just did some cleaning. And we actually largely keep costs down. We largely did all this work in-house with our maintenance group. Another operating capital project over at the public schools administration facility. We replaced 2 HVAC units there. I love new HVAC units. It looks pretty cool. Facility guy likes those kind of things. Moving on to the facility repair and renovation bucket. This is another HVAC project. We've got 4 HVAC units slated to be replaced over there. We replaced 2 of them. We had to do it in phases. We identified 2 of the highest priority units that needed to be replaced. We had some heat exchanger issues on 2 of those units, and then we'll phase in the other 2 here shortly. Next is, if you remember in the budget last year, was a significant number of new positions that are housed in the government center. I think it was 13 positions, and there was nowhere to put them. And so what do? We had to renovate. We had to scale down some offices. We had to change configurations in some spaces. And our facility repair and renovation bucket allowed us to do that. You can see we've got budget, finance, procurement, facilities, IT, public works, water resources, inspection, solid waste, environmental health, all were touched by that renovation to this facility. One of our bigger projects within this facility repair and renovation bucket was replacing the carpet in the judicial center. I don't know how often you get over to the judicial center, but carpet makes a big impact, and the carpet hadn't been replaced since the building was built. And this, you can see by the pictures, it really looks much better in those courtrooms and common areas. But it's a large facility. It took about 3 months to replace all the carpet in stages. You can imagine the logistics of not shutting down courtrooms or shutting down courtrooms in a staged fashion, but made a big difference, getting a lot of good feedback from judges, clerk of court, everyone. And then the last bucket, success story there is 911 renovation. I think Martin may have taken you over, through that renovation, but I've toured a lot of 911 centers, in relation to the emergency services complex project, and I got to say that 911 center that we've got down here in this building is right up there with a lot of the other 911 centers I've seen for a minimum amount of dollars, $587,000. But anyway, we renovated that space. That included basically new carpeting, new ceilings, new lights, some office reconfigurations. One of the more important pieces of that is that we were able to build this break room that's immediately adjacent to their workspace. If you don't know, 911 operators typically, if they don't have a space next to them, they've got to eat at their workstation, which is not necessarily, a great situation, and that's what a lot of our operators were doing. And so this allows them the ability to disconnect for a short amount of time and get in that area and you know, eat in peace. Another important aspect of this project was, and don't want to give away the thunder in moving into fiscal year 21 in a new bucket, but there was a lot of critical infrastructure that was addressed in this. We did some work on, or actually replaced the entire UPS system, or upgraded their UPS system, but also recircuited all their power needs to our emergency system, which means it's on generator backup, which wasn't consistent in the old space. So great job, great project, and been getting a lot of good feedback from the 911 staff on that project. So I think it's also important to talk about some of the projects we didn't complete last year, but they're in progress. You know, we've got a lot of work that's going on right now. That's a part of our CIP. You know, you can see the list. There's a lot of major capital projects that we've got underway right now. To start with the Southwest Union Library, currently that's in design. After we've got that land transferred, we finally were able to start wholeheartedly in the design process there. Sheriff's Office expansion, that's currently in design too. Of course, we're delivering that with CM at risk, and we've got our CM on board too. We've been doing some pricing. We're moved to design development. We're hoping that we'll be able to share more with the board on those projects shortly. Emergency Services Complex, the same. We're moving into DD. That's another CM at risk project. The Event Center, Jesse Helms Park, you should have seen on the last board agenda that we had our GMP contract that you approved, and so we're moving that forward fairly quickly. Board of Expansion Renovation, again, that's in design. That's at the end of schematic design right now, but moving forward. The Historic Courthouse building envelope repairs, it was some time ago we talked about that came in over budget. We were going back to look at scope, and we have done that, and now we're putting that out again to bid again. We've posted our pre-qualification for contractors and are ready to start bidding that project. The jail door control and locks project, they're working through the RFP right now. And then the kitchen equipment replacement project, they've ordered their equipment, but we're going to do flooring first, which you should have saw on the board agenda last agenda to approve that contract. So once we get that flooring completed, then we'll start with the kitchen equipment replacement. And then a couple of small, yes.
Is all of the equipment in the jails similar to restaurants where it's on wheels where you can move it around and clean?
There's some of it that's on wheels and there's some that's fixed in place.
It's commercial grade.
But it is all commercial grade
equipment.
stuff, but they can't move all the equipment. Some of it is fixed in place. And that's an important part of why we've got to wait until we do the flooring before we can do some of that equipment replacement.
I want to just throw this comment in that kitchen also fixes, prepares all of the senior nutrition meals that are served Monday through Friday.
I was aware of that, but I know, I never thought about stuff being on wheels until you need to clean under it, and then it really.
Yeah. And then a couple of small projects, but no less impactful. Union West Library replacing the boiler there. That's basically bidding right now, and Historic Post Office working through some HVAC improvements there, and we're getting pricing on that project too. Yes.
On some of your items, you say in design. Do you have targets when you'll be through design? Is there?
Yes, we do. Do you want me to go through all of those?
No, I would like to talk with you later about it.
Okay, yeah, sure. I think, one of the things we talked about recently was, when we're going to bring some, an update on all those projects to the board, and I think we're at a point where we got some good information to share as far as kind of design and things like that. So I think, you know, that may be one of the things in the future that we're, near future, that we're talking about bringing to the board.
Chris and his team update the management team once a month on all these projects, and they have the timelines. So we're tracking where they're at and where they say they're gonna be at. So all of those are moving along at a pretty good clip.
Good.
Yeah.
Union West Library, which one's that?
That's the one over Indian Trail
Okay.
area.
I was confused, I thought it was, but I just wanna make sure it wasn't the Waxhaw one.
No, that's the one in Indian Trail. That's the bigger library.
Yes.
You know, it's the second largest for the county other than the main library. And so anyway, I want to share that we've got a lot of work. You know, even though we shared some good success stories, we've still got some pretty significant projects that we're working through that are part of that capital plan even from last year. So then moving in a little bit to fiscal year 2021, thought we'd talk about wanted to share our bucket concept because we've got a little slight change to it that we want to talk about. And then just give you some sample projects by funding group. We're not going to talk a lot about the dollars necessarily. I think Blake will share some of that information about what the targets are for the overall capital plan, but you'll see some dollars associated with some projects, but not I won't be talking about necessarily the total for the plan this year until you see more from Blake and Mark's group. But I talked about, we've got basically our 3 buckets that we had last year, but you know, circumstances this year, we faced some events this year, you know, that brought out some deficiencies that we have in facilities. If you remember, we had the water main break that impacted the sheriff's office and jail. We also had a water quality issue that impacted our county facilities, you know, that we had to adapt a little bit to, and then we've got, you know, COVID-19 that has impacted some facilities. We also are facing kind of an issue with some power issues, you know, that we're seeing some issues with the city of Monroe and having some power glitches basically. They're not full power outages, they're not really brownouts either, but they're just short bursts of electrical issues that start shutting down some, you know, equipment and things like that. So with all that going on, it brought into focus some of our deficiencies on some of our critical infrastructure. And so while we're going to recommend that we look at another bucket that's called critical infrastructure. Typically, that's going to target critical facilities for the county and essential systems within those critical facilities. Typically, it's utility-based. You know, whether it's electrical utilities, potentially IT utilities, water, and things like that. And so, just to give you kind of the kind of industry standard definition of critical infrastructure, projects at critical facilities that target repair, replacement, improvement to asset systems, utilities that are essential for the facilities to function. And so examples of that again, generators, upgrades to electrical systems, IT cooling systems, and as we found out at the jail, alternate water sources. You know, that's one that kind of came out of left field. You know, what do you do when you don't have water at the jail? Well, you've got some issues that you got to deal with. And so we thought it was important to get out in front of the leadership team and the board that whenever we've got these critical infrastructure issues, to get that out in front, make it a more of a focus. they all fit within those three buckets necessarily, you know, the funding levels and things like that, but it's hard, sometimes it's easy for those to get kind of lost, you know, in the larger list. So we thought it was important to get that and get that as a new focus group for everybody to take a look at. Yes, sir.
The jail water situation, and I know you probably don't know this, but would it be possible to put a storage tank there to handle one day's average use, so that like when the water line breaks for a day?
Yeah, there are a couple of options. One of them is water tank. One of the issues is that you gotta turn that water over, right? So you just can't store the water and it's
Well, it
set.
wouldn't be storing it, you would be running it through the tank, and then if with a check valve in place.
Yeah, that would be so it's an expensive option, and when you start having to recycle the water through the normal water system, check valve, backflows, all those things, but it is an option, and you'll see that it's actually one of the line items in our plan to
With
do.
the pump, when the water
That's right.
system goes down, the pump will take over.
Yeah, the other option is basically you build in basically an inlet to the water system and use pressurized truck, something like that, that allows you to do kind of the same thing.
So then you got a mobile
You
everywhere.
got a mobile kind of thing, and it may be that it's a combination of both. You know, that you've got a valve that allows you to do that mobile truck, and you've got a storage tank. I'll just share one of the things we're considering at the emergency services complex is that tank system, and with potentially that valve system, so we'll have redundancy. You know, you'll have normal water, you'll have storage tank, and you'll have the ability to put a pressurized, you know, to that system. So we're going to evaluate what's, you know, the most feasible over in the sheriff's office, depending on the way the current, you know, water system is designed.
And do all the IT systems now, do they operate off of battery banks, where we charge the battery banks, where they're not susceptible to surges?
I would say most of the IT, especially in this facility, most of the IT is served by UPS systems. But I would say that there are some IT systems or closets, risers, whatever you want to, you know, characterize it as, that aren't. And so that will make it into this critical infrastructure bucket at some point. Also associated with IT is that you got to cool IT closets. So if you don't cool IT closets, then you can't operate IT closets because they overheat, equipment overheats and starts tripping out. And so
It's odd that you mentioned, I had $30,000 worth of equipment in the city of Monroe burn up about 10 years ago at different locations.
Yeah.
And it was surges, we were registering 260, but they said they don't have surges, so it's interesting to hear you say.
Yeah, I'll just share, we had 3 of these power issues this week, and, you know, we've made one call, and we're trying to figure out, you know, what's going on. Because in the end, it drops out, and, you know, even related to COVID, you know, if you've got people working from home and remotely, and you're using VPNs and the computer goes off, then you got an issue and you can't get into the VPN. But that's less of an issue necessarily than when our HVAC control system goes down. So then we've got complete shutdown HVAC system. We got IT, you know, that starts bumping UPSs on. You know, you start running UPSs. So, you know, that is a real issue.
Why could you not drill a well at the jail?
I'm not gonna say that you can't.
That would be a good idea.
I'm not
For
gonna say that you
emergency
can't.
basis.
Our goal is gonna be to hire an engineer that'll come in and look at their existing system, give us options on what makes the most sense, you know, from a financial perspective and a logistical perspective. Run that by the sheriff's group and find out and kind of land on what the best solution is gonna be. But I think all those things are on the table, you know, for this alternate water source.
I think that is a good idea. Would you include looking at a way?
Yes, sir. Sure will.
I want to point out too that, like, as Chris was saying, there's a lot of options out there. We're even exploring may have a water source that's not too far away. And I'm not guaranteeing it, but we're also exploring whether or not we can connect to the city's system and provide that as a redundant system. So wells, the city, tank, we're looking at all of that as what is an option.
That's at the Ag Center, right? We got Monroe City Water at the Ag Center. Right?
Yeah, it's not very far away, so we're looking at, well, is that an option? So,
Yeah, so we'll look at all those options. We're not gonna say we're set on a solution right now. And so just to give you a sample of what some of the projects are gonna look like this year within our buckets, I will share that our buckets are gonna remain consistent with last year's funding level. We're not gonna look to increase those, the funding level in those buckets. The only one that will be impacted, I think, is major capital, which you'll see that it's not going to be funded at the same level as it was last year. It was a pretty significant investment last year in major capital projects, so it's going to be a lower level of funding. But just give you a sense of some of the operational capital projects that we've got going on. Government Center, we've got, you know, if you look at the Government Center, you'll see some fog windows, you know, that are here. We've got bad seals, so we're looking to replace some of those. Moving down the list, some security improvements over Judicial Center, Union West Library. We're going to be doing some renovations for RFID implementation of the RFID system there. Human Services, some common area painting. You know, it's a new building, but, you know, it gets a lot of wear and tear, so we've got some common area painting we're going to do over there. And then, you know, at the jail, looking to do some replace command and intake counters. Moving to the facility repair renovation, some sample projects there. We've got some carpet replacement over at the public school system, main administration building. We've got some more HVAC units over at the Ag Center. And then we got some roof replacements at parks and some potential playground equipment or some playground equipment replacement over at parks as well. And then right now, I think the recommended budget is going to include one major capital project, and that's basically the Government Judicial Center building envelope repairs. Just so you give you some background on that project, when we had the hurricane, what was it, last year? You know, where we had two of the storms that came back to back, we had some significant water infiltration in these two facilities. And we had a study done and identified our highest priority repairs, and we anticipate trying to get those done with that money coming next year. You go ahead.
Chris, in spending this money, I know, I understand the process now with the RFQs, you know. If we could do stuff to help maybe Union County companies understand how to get in that process.
Yeah.
I know it's kind of awkward to go out and say, let me help you to get to where you can bid.
Yeah.
That doesn't guarantee them any business, but if we can be helpful there, it'd be real nice to see that money stay in the county.
Every year we do have a day where we invite businesses that want to do business with the county or want to know how to do business with the county, whether they're in construction or they provide supplies or anything. Full day worth of, I wouldn't say a seminar, but it's a
How to.
how-to out at the SBCC building. And it's well attended last year.
And I'm sure
It was packed.
you announced it, but if you would make us aware so that we could, you know, because a lot of people say, I never get to bid on nothing. And I'm sure it's because they hadn't went through the process.
Yeah.
I was surprised. I was shocked at how many people were there last year. It was well attended.
Yeah, we, that event, actually, we partner with a couple other entities, and that just brings more people in, you know.
Do you partner with the Chamber of Commerce? Because that'd be a great place to,
I don't think we partnered with the chamber, but we partnered with all the other municipalities.
but the Chamber is out there knocking on.
They're a partner.
Are they?
Absolutely,
Okay.
yes. And Cheryl does several projects with the chamber throughout the year through procurement, but we're happy to, and we're always happy, Dennis, to talk to folks if they need, you know, one-on-one. Our procurement staff can sit down and walk them through how the process works.
Well, it just sounds like y'all are already doing what I'm asking, but it's nice to be able to tell somebody.
Yeah. Well, I'll say too, that the operational capital projects, the smaller projects, we typically, all those are local. You know, we don't, you know, go out. Occasionally, if it's a little, if it's more specialized and we can't get anybody local, we'll go to Charlotte.
Well, I'm surprised that the old post office HVAC system hadn't been done yet, because that was just a replacement of units and.
It's not just a replacement. We've got some issues with,
Duct work.
yeah, duct work and how it's, you know, we've got a basement unit that's serving the veterans area, and the veterans area is the issue, the biggest issue. So we're trying to solve that issue through this. So it took a little time. Plus we got a lot of projects going on, and it's just, you know, some of them are, you know, have to get, you know, in the schedule, right? So we're doing the best we can, I think, with the staff we've got in place to move everything forward. And then critical infrastructure, I talked about that and how important that is. In the recommended budget, you'll see 3 projects. The first is basically here at the Government Center, the first phase of a larger project, and that's basically we'll do a study of the electrical system here to determine, you know, what the best solution is for making sure this facility, because it is one of the critical facilities in Union County. You know, whenever we've got any emergency, this building needs to be operated. The jail, I think you know that they had some issues with their generator fairly recently, and so we've got a generator that we're going to look at that came from Public Works, but we got to design that and make sure we're doing that the right way. So that's on the board too to do. And then at the jail, this domestic water alternate source piping issue. So we've budgeted 65 for it based on basically a tank system, and we'll see whether or not, you know, well makes, you know, as good a sense as anything else.
Are those generators, do we farm that service out to the manufacturers of them?
Maintenance.
Sir?
Maintenance.
No. I was just, the maintenance of it,
Yeah.
if it's a cat generator,
Yeah, so we've got maintenance contracts for basically the annual generator maintenance. There's monthly generator maintenance that our in-house staff does, basically going through checking, doing some measurements, doing things like that to predict whether or not we're going to have some issues. But if we've got issues, then we call, you know, we either call any of the manufacturers, or we've got basically a standing maintenance agreement with a company right now. It's called Pratt Power, and they specialize in generators. So with that, that's what I've got for you today, and open up for questions or comments or anything that you know, is of interest to you and wanted to share with you. Okay.
Thank you, Chris. Good job.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And I'm not sure who's next, so I guess it's Ashley. So-
It is.
I'm going to pull her presentation up for her, and she'll.
Thanks.
Morning. Y'all
to the point. So, y'all can thank me later. The Union County DSS group home lease is what we're going to talk about real quick. But I wanted to kind of give y'all some background about the group home and why we've been using it and what we've been using it for. It was started back in 1986. I was 6 years old. I just want to throw that out there. I thought that would make some of y'all feel great this morning. It was created. We got to keep it lively. It was created to assist with emergency foster care placements. We have sometimes children that we have to take into custody in the wee hours of the morning, and it's very difficult to reach out to foster parents at that hour to find placement for children. So it was a lot easier to place children into this group home setting so that they had someone to take care of them, watch over them until we're able to get them in with a foster family. We also have some children who are a little more difficult to place. We have to find the right family for each child, and sometimes that might take a little while. So we've, through the years, utilized the group home for that. Throughout the past 10 years, we developed a contract with our local Juvenile Crime Prevention Council. Some of you may know it as JCPC. That's a council that works under the auspices of the Department of Juvenile Justice for the state of North Carolina. And it's kind of a community partnership here locally to work with children and youth in our community who may get into a little bit of trouble in the community. So we've had a contract with them for the past 5 to 10 years where we treat those children at our group home. It's a 90-day treatment program that we work with those kids with. We also continue to use the facility for emergency foster care placements. So that's kind of how we've been operating since 1986 in a very small nutshell. Our objective with leasing this out is multifaceted, but the main point is that the group home serves a larger purpose than just what DSS utilizes it for. As you've heard me talk about, we currently kind of run the operation for DJJ in the moment, but we are looking at a way that we can partner smarter with the state and use the county funding that we've been using for the group home for those mandated DSS programs that we operate and do well. Y'all know all of those programs as Child Protective Services, Adult Protective Services, Child Welfare, also our economic services programs that Blake was talking about earlier that provide that safety net for our community when the economy takes a downturn. That's what we're realizing right now, and we have seen a definite uptick in the amount of people applying for food and nutrition services. You may know that as food stamps, and also family and children's Medicaid to provide health insurance for people when they're out of work and for their children. So keeping it simple, we are looking to lease the group home to DJJ. So instead of them contracting with us and us doing their work, we lease it back to them and they do their own work. It saves us money and it continues to provide the same service to the community. We are looking to begin that lease. Hopefully, I am pushing and emailing and aggravating. You have to keep the state on their toes. So I am staying on them to get that lease started come July 1. I received last night about 8:30 p.m. a draft copy of the lease. So I'm going to get with Carolyn Mayer with our attorney's office to kind of go through that first draft of the lease so that we can provide feedback and information to DJJ. We're looking at a $1 per year lease because we are setting this up so that we can still have a place where we can utilize emergency foster care placement. So this will mandate that DJJ has to keep one bed open in the group home at all times for us to use at DSS for emergency foster care placement. So we're not shooting ourselves in the foot by leasing out the group home. The Department of Juvenile Justice has granted Union County $107,000. That just happened this past week. They did a pre-lease inspection of the building and had some things that they wanted us to take care of before they assumed the lease. So they gave us the funding to do that. I've been working in partnership with Chris and his team to get those projects completed. It's a lot of those smaller capital projects he was talking about earlier, but DJJ is funding that for us. So not only do we get to lease the property of them, they take over that liability and they still provide the service to the community. We save some money. They also give us money to do some upkeep to our own property. So it comes out as a win-win-win for me. The group home budgeted expenses that we had planned on for the upcoming fiscal year was around $243,575. We now will be able to take that money and put it back into the DSS mandated programs that we have.
Actually, I have a question about that.
Yes.
I guess I assumed that all the children there were Union County children.
They are all Union County children.
Well,
Some of them come through the Juvenile Crime Prevention Council DJJ program.
Well, won't we have to pay the state to take care of these children?
No, so we recently have only been using it for those emergency placements. So that's why we're gonna keep that one bed open at all times with this lease. That'll be written into the lease language, so that we'll still be able to use it for Union County children when we need to. But the majority of the children we've been serving at our group home have been referred to us through DJJ.
They're not kids in our custody.
Yeah,
They're not what?
They're not in our custody.
the DJJ kids.
So this is truly a big savings.
Yes, sir.
It's a lot.
So the 243 include operating and personnel, or just operating?
All.
All.
But it excludes the grant funding we received from JCPC. So that's your true dollar amount.
That's county general funded
Yes, sir.
dollars right there.
Yes, sir.
My assumption is the state is going to provide the staff to run this whole thing, so it'll free up the staff that we were using. Are we going to have to provide staff if we have to put a child in there?
So, no, yes and no.
Okay.
So what we have spoke to DJJ about is that it's their hopes that once they take over the lease and they are operating the program, that they'll be able to utilize some of the staff that we already have on staff there. That way people wouldn't be out a job, right? Because I don't have enough positions to take all of the staff that we have at the group home and move them into DSS. So it is their hope and my hope that they'll be able to utilize those staff for their program that they'll be operating at the group home. We do have 2 staff members, one that is a social worker that will just transition back into foster care social work. And then we have the program manager, and he has been shadowing in child welfare to see if it would be a good fit for him to move into child welfare or stay with the group home program. So it's kind of twofold.
If they stay, they become an employee of the state.
Yes.
Okay.
This is very impressive.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
For somebody born in 1980.
I mean, I have to brace myself.
Just expect more savings next year.
Oh, Lord. We'll see what happens. I'll try my best. All right, y'all. If there are no more questions, I am done. Y'all enjoy your day. I don't know if it'll be as fun as my presentations.
Blake, she sets a pretty high bar.
I know. With that, we had considered taking a break now, maybe 5 or 10 minutes, if everyone would like to do that, or we can push through. It's up to you, whatever you'd like to do.
10 minutes, be good.
Perfect.
we have third degree burn like they don't.
Set a meeting for the 4 of us.
All right. Wonderful. Thank you, Chairman Simpson. Thank you to Chris and Jeff for your presentation, and also for Ashley for the great information you shared. We're going to move in to talk about the actual budget process and some of the key precepts that we've been following for this year's budget process, and to hopefully you like what you see. We are going to talk about the budget, then community partners funding, the process overview, and how that recommendation is going to come to you, and also a little bit about the school budget, just to give you some lead into the packets that you're going to receive. Before we do anything, I want to remind everybody that everything that we do as a county, every action we take, every dollar we spend, every process we go through should relate back and feed up to the Board of County Commissioners' strategic objectives, which are public safety, community consensus, economic development, sustainability, and organizational strengthening. So as we go through this budget process, I think you'll see that everything that we're planning, everything that we're doing, will roll up and feed into these strategic objectives with a strong delineation. So let's keep that in mind as we go forward. Also, the core values for this year's budget will be the same as FY20. We may tweak them a little bit going into the proposed budget, but for an overview will be to maintain fiscal discipline, invest in core services, and continue to build out a strategic framework for internal business processes. And a big piece of that was the CIP and the facilities portion that we talked about earlier. Some of the initial budget assumptions that we began the process with back in November have changed. The world has changed since March, and so as a result, we're responding to that change and moving forward and developing a responsible budget. We've had to change our assumptions also. We've changed our penny value. We noticed some more growth in our ad valorem tax assessment. We work with our tax administrator, Van Harrell, and we feel comfortable we can increase our penny value from 3% growth to 3.2%. That takes the value from 2.786, which is what we began with back in November, up to 2.792 for the penny value now. We're, as our manager mentioned earlier, we are projecting and anticipating a significant loss to sales tax, which is a significant amount of county revenue. For Union County, we're not alone in this. Every county in North Carolina, every state in the United States, everywhere around the world will be subjected to this, and I'm sure every private business, well, most private businesses also are reacting to this. Our portion, what we're seeing is about a $4.3 million decrease to sales tax from what we were projecting initially.
Annually?
Annually.
Okay.
Yeah.
Not quarterly?
No, annually. The 4.27 number comes from our initial expectations, where we were projecting 4.5% growth from the FY20 budgeted amount. The FY20 budget amount was $47.8 million, and we were on track through February to collect 100.2% of total sales tax. And so since then, things have fallen off quite a bit, and we've had to readjust our expected collections. And the expected loss for the FY21 portion is $4.27 million, and for FY20, for the last quarter of FY20, and I think that's what you were referring to, is about $3.4 million is what we're expecting to not collect, and is the portion that has just vanished into thin air that we will see. Our investment income we're expecting that to decrease by half based on market conditions, and that affects that permeates the entire county budget throughout many funds in many areas. The general fund portion of that loss will be $750,000. We had record collections last year. We collected over $2.5 million. The budget was 1.5, and so we're expecting next year to decrease the budget by half. So we're trying to be very conservative on that. Hopefully we'll be surprised, and the market will continue to grow, and we'll see some gains there, but we want to be conservative as we can in our projections now. We also are going to see a decrease to our sales tax that will be realigned or extracted from our collections and moved over into the new fire districts. I believe the last meeting you took action to approve the resolution to create the new fire districts, And this is an ongoing discussion, but there's a piece of our sales tax that because they're now going to be special revenue districts, that they are entitled to a portion of sales tax. And that portion, as quantified in FY21, will be just over $500,000. To begin the process, we began a process with a target-based budgeting. And so in doing that, each department was given a target to reduce their budget for efficiency purposes. Our county manager instructed each department to find 5% of their operational budget and remove that from the budget as an ongoing efficiency. And the quantity of that portion was $800,000 more or less, and that excludes the sheriff's office and emergency communications as critical services. Departments have been notified to expect a continuation budget or a flat budget with limited to no growth. Again, we're trying to shoot towards a moving target, not knowing what the real impact of the sales tax will be. We're trying to project what that will be. But the 3-month lag from when you spend $1 in the county to when we get a portion of that back to the county coffers is a 3-month lag. And so we won't know the impact of March until at least June 10th when we get that disbursement of sales tax. So when that happens, we should have a good idea. But it won't be perfect because the shutdown happened, mid-March, and so it won't be a full month's worth. The real full month won't be till we see April, because April was locked down pretty tight. So we're trying to project what that's going to be, and that's where those numbers are coming from. And we're looking at little to no opportunity for enhancement or service expansion. Now, we are working hard to try and realign internal funds. We know that the growth capacity to the ad valorem tax rate is limited. And on the next slide, we'll show this, but we're expecting 3.2% growth there. But we're trying to carve out some internal funds that we can realign into strategic areas that would be for strategic investment that would otherwise be enhancements, but we're going to try and use existing funding to accomplish those goals. Some more assumptions. Because of the revenue situation, opportunity to fund contingencies is not available. I believe it's been since FY18 that we've actually budgeted a contingency, which would be, I believe, and this is before my time, but I believe it was a board contingency of $250,000 or maybe $500,000 that would be put into the budget in case something happened mid-year or the board wanted a pot of money that was undesignated to accomplish a goal that came up mid-year, or to, if something was overlooked, to accomplish that. And because of reduction, we haven't been able to include that in the budget in the past few years, and this year even less so. Now, in prior years, we've had more unassigned fund balance to go to if things have come up through the year. We'll talk about this a little bit more as we go along, but our capacity or our reservoir of unassigned or unreserved fund balance is exhausted, and so that's not going to be an opportunity for this year. To balance the budget, to propose a flat tax rate budget or a no tax rate growth budget is going to require some tax rate or revenue realignments between funds and partners. The county manager talked about how we're going to begin reframing the concept of individual tax rates and really focus on the overall county tax rate, which we've been able to hold flat for, this will be the 3rd year consecutive that we've held the flat tax rate at 73.09 cents. And so there's going to be some decisions that'll be made to make sure we can do that, and there'll be some realigning along the way that we'll look at that also. Again, opportunities to access unassigned fund balance is very limited. We talked about that. We're looking at opportunities to maximize revenue options. The first thing you do when you begin building a budget is try and estimate or figure out how much revenue you're going to have, and then build your expenses up to that point. We know that we have to balance our budget. We're not Congress. We have to balance our budget, and so to do that, we need to figure out what our revenues are going to be and build our expenses up to that. So, in doing that, we want to make sure we maximize every potential revenue dollar that we can for the benefit of county business. One of the decisions you will very likely see in the proposal is our manager, about a month ago, maybe even longer now, made a very decisive decision to implement a county hiring freeze so that we could preserve some of those salary dollars that had lapsed through the year to try and offset the expected $3.4 million loss from sales tax. And so one of the strategies that's under consideration will be to extend that hiring freeze through the first half of FY21. So it began, I believe, in April, and it would be to just continue it through the end of December, 1st of January, to capture some of the savings to offset the budget for next year. Let's see. We're going to be focusing on supporting and maintaining critical services and core services. We know the county actually mentioned that during an economic downturn, lots of county residents who find themselves in difficult circumstances depend on human services, depend on public health, and on other activities that the county government provides. And we would want to support those services during those times because their service demand is up, their volume is up, and that would be counterproductive to not do that. And again, just to point out, there will be some difficult decisions required to balance the budget with a no tax rate increase. Manager Watson has committed to do that, and we are committed to support him in doing that and delivering a budget to you that will be a no tax rate increase budget. But just to prepare you, there will be some difficult decisions and difficult conversations that may have to take place to make that possible. To begin the budget process, we need to get an idea of our revenues, what those will be. Our ad valorem revenue is our biggest source of revenue for our general fund. This chart shows the total assessed value in FY20, and then what we're projecting to grow forward into in FY21. What you'll see there is that the value of a penny from the adopted rate in FY20 was 2,706, and we're projecting it to be 2,792, which again is a growth of 3.2%. That would be great if we can achieve it. I think we will, and it's a conservative estimate. This year we projected 3.6% growth, which was I would classify as aggressive, and so I think it would show wisdom to bring it down a little bit to make sure that we can meet those targets. And again, the goal is to develop a budget within the parameters of the current total county tax rate, so to stay within the 7309. The manager began his message talking about looking differently at the countywide tax rate. This is a chart that we've used in the past that breaks out the bifurcated tax rate. The way I like to reframe this is that these are individual allocations or portions of the overall county tax rate. So that'll be the language we use going forward. And then you would see some fluctuations between those to kind of explain how things are happening and how funding will be pushed one way or the other. One of the things that is under consideration is pushing 0.23 of the overall tax rate from EMS to the fire departments to be able to establish those initial fire districts and make sure they have the resources they need to get those initial budgets in and then start fresh on good footing there. EMS is a great partner for the county. They've been very helpful and very willing to help the county out to make sure that we can meet all of our needs and meet their needs too as they deliver excellent service in the community. This is only able to be accomplished if they can use their available fund balance to purchase their capital needs for FY21, and they've been great partners in doing this over the past few years. So their initial request was about $1.7 million for additional ambulances, additional equipment to go on those new ambulances to refresh their stock, and they're going to be able to handle that with the fund balance they have available on their books. And so that means that we don't have to fund them quite as much, and the associated tax rate can be pushed to other needs within the county. And again, I want to preface this by saying these are working numbers. It's possible they'll change, but we want to give you an update on where our thoughts are as far as how we're going to balance the budget. So it's a preview of the proposed budget, but it's a working version. about that. And again, you'll see the total county by tax rate is 7309 in this scenario, and it's unchanged here. One thing to point out, over the past 3 years, the general fund and EMS have absorbed fluctuations in these tax rate swaps we've had. Just to point that out, when you see some areas, you'll see over the years an increase, a slight increase. The decrease will be in the general fund or in the EMS fund, just for context. All right, this is our revenues by category as they come into the county chart of accounts. If you look at the far right in the bottom corner, that's the overall growth percentage of the general fund revenues. And what we're expecting is an aggregate increase of 1.5% in total revenues once you balance everything out. So that's our 3.2% increase in ad valorem, offset by the expected 4.5% decrease in sales tax, and then all the other smaller ones kind of falling in line there. The aggregate is 1.5%. So when we get to that's the number we can build towards. So when we get to designing exactly what expenses are going to be loaded in there to meet that revenue target, it'll be a growth of revenue and expense, because the budget has to balance, of 1.5%. So that's to me, that's a pretty modest growth factor year over year, and I think that's it's a merit to the fiscal leadership that we have in the county and the desire to be conservative in the use of county resources and serving taxpayer dollars. Let's see, did I miss anything? The decrease in sales tax, of course, is related to the COVID-19, and then you'll see at the bottom line there, the fund balance appropriation. In FY20, we appropriated $2.6 million in fund balance for use to offset operating expense, and you'll see that the amount for FY21 is 1.65, and so that's a decrease quite a bit. And in prior years, we've allocated a portion of the unassigned fund balance that we had available, not all of it, just a portion of it. This year, we've run that well pretty dry, and 1.65 is the extent of our unassigned fund balance capacity for FY21. So I think it's good practice to not depend on fund balance for operating, if you can help it. But in this case, that's all the capacity we have for fund balance to use it this year. So we need to kind of be, in looking forward to FY22, be looking at strategies that we can implement maybe around our use of fund balance, maybe around setting targets of what is a reasonable amount of unassigned fund balance to try and maintain for emergencies, unexpected one-time expenses that come on. So I'd like to, I'm going to, with my staff, work towards putting in some guidelines that would prescribe in what instances we really should be using our fund balance, and if we want to try and grow it up to a manageable level, not too much like maybe we were a few years back, but also to keep us out of the skids too. This is a chart that just shows the arc of our use of unassigned fund balance over the past few years. You'll see the yellow bar was a few years back in 2019. We had an abundance of available fund balance at that time, and we used it for critical needs then, and we're coming down on the backside of that arc. And I think, there's probably a happy medium in there somewhere where we could shoot to have a specific amount. If we get above that, we can use it for specific purposes. If not, we can make decisions on funding to maybe try and increase that a little bit year over year. So we have a comfortable reserve above the 20% fund balance by board decision. That's all there. This slide is representative of the fire districts. We know that in FY21, there's some exciting things happening around fire. We've always had 5 individual fire districts for our big 5, Wesley Chapel, Hamby, Waxhaw, and now our smaller fire districts are going to become actual fire districts. And so this is a charting out kind of the changes included there. Let's see, this is, you'll see on the top portion, the countywide fire tax, which is paid by every resident of Union County. It would increase from 1.33, excuse me, to 1.56. But keep in mind, that's an increase from the EMS rate now to fire, but in net overall, it's still flat at 7309. So it's really a reallocation of current revenue that we collect as under the umbrella of our 73.09 tax rate. It's just a realignment or reallocation of that to fire. And just for context, that increase of 0.23, if you have a home value of about 150,000, the increase to your bill would be $3.3 over the year. But again, that's just for context on the scale, because there won't be any increase to the taxpayer's bill under this scenario, because there'll be an offsetting decrease on the EMS tax that we currently have. And again, the overall tax rate in net will be no change at 73.09.
Bottom line there, Blake, we're gonna have to quit going to the EMS well, aren't we?
We will eventually, yeah. And I think this is probably the last point to do that. They've been, again, they're great partners. They want to make sure that we make good decisions for the county residents, and we're very supportive of them also. So we certainly appreciate their willingness to be flexible there. They do have another revenue source from the state where customers have their tax payments are garnished because of unpaid EMS bills, and that's been on an upward trend over the years. So that increase has kind of made it possible to access some of this funding for different areas too. But I think we're probably at the point where we can take a pause there. All right. The second part of the chart is specific to the new individual fire districts. Just to point out kind of the change in funding strategy, the first column there on the second section is FY20. I'm trying to squint, my eyesight's not so good. I'll turn here. In FY20, we used several different funding methods. So this is the ad valorem portion that was used. We used a series of transfers from other funds. You might remember that there was a great need in FY20 for one-time expenses, some new trucks, some new tankers, a lot of new air packs, some cascade systems. You know, it's very expensive to be a fire department, and a great deal of those needs were funded through transfers from other funds throughout the county, and that's what this represents. Of course, we had the fire fee that was collected by the smaller districts. It was $100 per home. We know that's going to go away now under the new model, and so we're not planning on any transfers of other funds in FY21, and of course the fire fee will go away here. And the fund balance appropriated is funding that was given to them to replenish some of their one-time expenses and needs. The individual fire district taxes, there's various. Every fire district will now have their own individual tax rate, along with the countywide fire tax rate, and then along with their applied a portion of sales tax that they're entitled to as being a special revenue fund in the county. And that goes back to the $500,000 I mentioned earlier. That's the portion that's being redirected from our allocation to the fire districts there. So that's the several components of funding fire, and then investment revenue, and it's staying relatively flat or going down. So I think those are the points there.
Go back.
Sure.
So the total 16.5 to 16.7, so it's $250,000.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. I almost overlooked that. The growth from FY20 for total funding for total budgets of all county fire departments is only increasing $250,000 from prior year. So there's not a huge amount of growth in there. There were some of these were some one-time expenses that have been transitioned into funding for departments ongoing to supplement or give them a head start to have some funding going forward. But the year over year is relatively flat.
$250,000 over 14 departments.
Yes, sir.
Isn't there 17 departments? There are 17 fire departments.
That's the reason I just asked Patrick that.
Oh.
There's, I'm gonna have to go back and count them.
Sometimes we include
17 or
17
18.
districts.
Yeah.
Supported by 14 departments. So you have Providence, Weddington, and Wesley Chapel, who are all Wesley Chapel. But I'm gonna have to go back and, I don't wanna do it off the cuff.
14 departments.
Okay.
All right, I'm gonna make a note. 14 departments. All right. Moving on to the investing in employees. We know that the county certainly ascribes to the thought that county's employees are our greatest assets. Without county employees, we couldn't carry out the great work that we do each day, impact the lives of residents through the spectrum of life in Union County. And we certainly appreciate county residents, or county employees and residents. To recognize that, as of now, in the working budget, we've included funding for pay for performance for merit increase for county employees. The insurance to there's an increase to the health benefits fund, which funds the health benefits for counties, with no increase to costs pushed to counties. Pushed to employees for FY21. And we want to continue the commitment to offer a standard benefit package to employees and be sure that we can retain and attract quality employees to Union County during the pandemic recovery, because there will be people in transition employment, and it would be a great opportunity to pick up some really talented folks who may be in transition to come and enjoy the great life of working here in Union County. And as well, just to mention again, many of our departments have seen an increase in service demand as a result of the pandemic and public health and in social service and other areas through the decline in the economy. Chris gave a great overview of our facilities, the projected growth, or the buildings that we have in the pipeline that are some are in the build phase, some are in the design phase, some are in the bid phase. All of those projects that have been approved will someday come to fruition. And when they come to fruition, they come online, we've sometimes borrowed money, we've issued debt to build the structure and put furniture in it, but there's operational costs that come along with those facilities. And we're seeing that those operational costs, sometimes we can do a better job of projecting those forward or keeping those in mind when we approve those expenses. One thing I wanted to mention was the concept around the initiation of the voter-approved debt fund was that when voters go to the polls and approve a debt project like the Emergency Services Center or the Sheriff's Admin Building, we make it clear what the impact of the tax rate for that, to pay that debt, what that will be. I think we should do the same thing in projecting the operational increases and the maintenance costs for those buildings too. These are examples of some of the buildings coming online in FY21. The Jesse Helms Special Events Center and the Board of Elections renovation, where you can see that those are predicted to come online in the last quarter of FY21, and so the costs you see there are for 1 quarter of the year. So it's close to $300,000 for 1 quarter. Now the next year in FY22, those costs will annualize, so it'll quadruple that, because we'll need to fund 4 quarters of operating those buildings. So for just those 2 buildings, which, compared to an emergency services center or a human services center, they're relatively small building projects. That's $1 million in operations that we'll need to be aware of that's coming online in FY22. and be aware of, is that gonna be, are we gonna be able to find efficiencies within the general fund to offset that? Or is there a, if there's a tax rate increase for the debt that's issued, we need to be mindful of that operational impact as well. And if you can consider the bigger buildings coming online, the sheriff's admin building, merchant services, those operational expenses will be, I'm expecting, and Chris has a better idea, will be quite a bit more than that on an annual basis. Yeah.
Some of those have revenue generation to assist that.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. And I don't have that broken out to show a net number. I just wanted to show the net expense to give some scale there. But that's a great point. And I'm hopeful that we can work together with the facilities group to start putting those numbers together for our planning purposes. I'd like to start looking at maybe a 2-year planning period for the budget to get an idea of where we are for 21 this year, and then do kind of a short-term plan for 22 a little earlier in the year, and just kind of put that in the atmosphere of we know these big bucket items are hanging around, and they're going to drop on us in FY22, FY23. So let's start the conversation a little bit earlier and see how to do that for the best of our
Before you go off of that.
Yeah.
To give you another glimpse into the operating cost impacts, SPCC is completing their new building. Y'all have seen the nice building they built out there, and they've just completed their renovations to the Tyson Center. The combined operational increase cost on those two buildings request was $750,000. We worked with them to get that number down, but it's still $500,000. So that, just to put that in some kind of perspective. That is that's one thing that I was a little surprised by. That project had started several years ago, but I don't think that there was ever the conversation held about what the operating expense was going to be, and what the expectation for funding that operating expense was going to be toward the county. And I don't think anybody expected to see that kind of cost come down. And so in my conversations with the management team, we're talking about how we work with our community partners and helping to project these kinds of expenses so that we don't have those surprises, because that was a surprise on us this year.
Thank you, Mark. And I'd like to piggyback on that and just appreciate SPCC for being flexible in that number, in their request. Understanding the pickle that we're in as far as revenue, they were willing to rework their numbers and be a good partner to bring that down a little bit so it would be more manageable for the county and not consume so many county resources that would take away from core county services.
So we know that they have another building that they're looking at, getting a project that they're looking at another location starting soon. And so right up front, when we start talking about the cost of that building, we need to also project out what the operating expenses are going to be. Again, so there are no surprises on the back end, and everybody goes in with eyes wide open on what the expense of that building is going to be.
Now I want to shift a little bit and talk about the changes that we've made to the community partner funding process. There were some reasons why we wanted to relook at it. The purpose in doing this was to open up the process, make it more accessible to all nonprofits within Union County, make it more transparent. There seemed to be, over the past several years, a core group of 9 or 10 agencies that at some point in the past had gotten into the pool, and the pool was never kind of refreshed, and they were just replenished with the same amount of funding year over year. And not that that's good or bad, I'm not making a judgment call, I'm just explaining that that was what was happening. And so in order to make it accessible to any agency that wanted to participate, we wanted to formalize a process to do that, so agencies would feel motivated to participate. When we talked about, Commissioner Rape had a great question about county vendors, to try and recruit county vendors to keep those county funds within the county, and this is another example of that. The community grants provide an opportunity for Union County to partner with complementary agencies. We have a wide breadth of services in the county, but there are some areas that we're not positioned to serve, or some areas that we don't currently have staff or programs to address. And so that's where there's great efficiencies in partnering with some of these grant organizations. It's usually less expensive and they're closer to the ground in a grassroots manner. The criteria to be considered part of this program is the organization must be local to Union County. 100% of Union County funding must serve only Union County residents. So they're not going to receive our money and then divert it up to Charlotte, divert it to Anson County. It's going to serve folks here in the county. They must deliver services aligned to county objectives and focus on areas that the county is not currently focused on. And there's no expectation of funding for agencies that participate in this process, but we encourage everyone to apply. We refresh this process, and I'd like to give some recognition to Adrienne Rory. She's an analyst on our team that's relatively new with the county, and this was her project to take this and revamp, and she did a wonderful job. So I'm just sharing all the great work that she did. We partnered with our public communications office to announce or market the new process throughout the county using all of our social media platforms and other ways of communication. We appreciate their help in doing that. We updated the request form to make it more thorough and be able to more completely vet organizations before we enter into a partnership with them. The last thing we want to do is approve funding for an organization and then find out that they have bad debts, they have credit issues, they have other things. So we want to make sure and look at that up front before we get into that. Process update, I mentioned before there was about 9 or 10 agencies involved in that pool of funding. Once we put the word out and we let people know it was open, we received 19 requests, so double the amount of folks that were currently receiving funding. We received 10 more. One agency that was historically in that pool is no longer active, and so they automatically come out of the pool. All the requests were reviewed by a panel of reviewers, which were made up by department directors here in the county. Ashley was on that panel. Folks mostly in the human services, community services area that have some expertise in that world. They reviewed all of the requests and gave a ranking on them based on the specific criteria of how effective they are in their mission, how efficient they are in meeting their goals, how closely they align to your strategic objectives, and those were ranked in rank order for the executive team to review and for the manager ultimately to look at and make a recommendation on what funding adjustments you would make. That proposal will be included in the proposed budget that you'll receive the presentation on June 1st, and you'll be able to look at it, review it. If you'd like to recommend some changes, it's completely discretionary funding, and it's up to you eventually as you adopt the budget as to which agencies you'd like to include, or it could be an increase, it could be a decrease, it could be the same. It's totally up to the board as to how they want to handle that based on manager recommendation.
I'd like to have a question.
Sure.
Is this strictly cash funding, or were those agencies that request in-kind support? For instance, they want to use the Ag Center once a year, they want it for free. Were those included, or is that something different?
I didn't see any requests like that. Everything that I saw was for cash, was for support of services that they're already providing, so they can expand those to include more people.
Well, I know in the past, we've had a policy that we don't give anything for free. So we may want to look at that in terms of how we want to address those requests.
Okay.
Because I know they're coming. They always do.
Jerry, that's a good point. There was one organization, and I'm sure it's a nonprofit, that when we went up on the rates of the Ag Center, they were wanting to stay at the old rate, but if they qualify as an agency, they could go in through here when you said.
We didn't get an application form.
We just
We
want to be
want-
We
consistent.
didn't get an
I
application.
know, but what I'm saying, it goes back to educating them, just like the vendors, we gotta start to,
We just want to be consistent and fair.
right.
And that's the first thing they'll say is, well, you did it for them, why can't you do it for us?
And what Mark's saying was, you didn't apply.
Right, exactly.
Michelle, would you mind saying, giving the board a little bit more insight into this last bullet point down here?
Yes, so, and I think when you get to the next slide like has the actual agencies, so that'll help explain. There are some of these agencies that actually provide what I would consider, they're a vendor of the county, actually. The services that they provide complement or are services that we would otherwise provide or have to provide. So a couple of examples of those are Safer Communities, for example, does life skills programs in the jail and has for quite some time. We are going to transition that agreement under the sheriff's budget. I think that it better aligns there. We've talked to the sheriff about that. He's in agreement with that. Our Council on Aging funding, we're going to realign that with Human Services so that the Human Services folks are actually managing that agreement on an annual basis. And there may be some others that better align as we start to, like the community shelter actually may better align with Human Services as a partner. And so that we would start to limit folks who are coming through this avenue and are really seen as more of an operational exercise from the department and not just a grant funding opportunity. Because what we want to use the county dollars and what we are using them for is to complement or do work that we would otherwise have to do. So I think that will be a better way for us to manage those dollars going forward and those relationships.
And in the application, the funding request, it's very explicit in what would create a reasonable request. Where you mentioned before, using the Ag Center for free. I don't believe that would fall within the structure of what the purpose of this program. But if you like, I can definitely make that available if you wanted to share that with anybody. We shared it on our website. I think we shared it on links and from the social media platforms. If coming around this time next year, if you want to publicize it on Facebook or other areas, or make people aware of it, you can definitely do that.
Is there any evaluation of anybody applying to what their total revenue is, how much is operational, how much actually gets to the clients that they serve?
Yeah.
Do we have a threshold that we?
Well, I wouldn't say we have a threshold that we're using now since this is the first year of kind of formalizing the process, but we do ask them for a staff salary review just to make sure that their CEO isn't making 90% of the total budget of the organization and make sure that they're in line with that community. We request their financial reports, an audit where it makes sense to make sure they're a clean audit, make sure that they don't owe any back taxes, things like that, to make sure they're in relatively good standing. And Adrian did a really good job in putting all this together. She reached out to a lot of our peer counties who have a more formalized process to kind of look at the best practices of how we would want to form our process. And this is in line with other counties that we've seen and how they handle it. So, but it doesn't mean this is the final process. This is kind of the first step, and we can continue to refine it going forward based on feedback and based on feedback from applicants too, because I'm sure that there may be some applicants that could give us some advice on how to improve the process as well. Great.
Ground 40, were they ever on this list?
They didn't apply.
Yeah, ground 40. I don't. That doesn't ring a bell.
they're a nonprofit. I mean, we work with them in Human Services. I've met with them several times. They were aware of the process. I'm sure of that, but they did not apply for funding.
Yeah, this is everybody that applied. And if you look at the columns here, any agency that has a number in this column means that they were approved in 20 and for prior years also. This is the amount of increase that they requested, and for the new groups, this is their initial funding they've asked for, and this is what the total request would be. For example, the community shelter, they're currently getting almost $12,000. They've asked for an increase of 13 for a total of 25. So this is the amount that you would see in the budget. And again, the current amount is about $285,000. We had quite a large number of requests, and then about $1 million in total. These with Council on Aging, these were specific requests to reduce their wait list for in-home aid. I believe they said their current wait list is 160 people to receive in-home services through Council on Aging. And so we asked them to break it up into tiers of how much it would cost. For $34,000, we would reduce their wait list by 18 people. For $136,000, it would reduce the list by 88 people. And for $300,000, it would reduce the list by 179. So that's the largest piece of the requested amount, and that's what it's broken out by. In the managers, we put together what we refer to as the manager's budget workbook, which is an aggregate list of all the requests from all the departments, all our partners, and these groups. And the section for most departments is maybe this thick. The section for these folks is like this because they were asked to submit so much background information and history. So it was quite an undertaking for our review panel to review all of those requests and give good feedback and recommendations. So I certainly want to appreciate them for their effort in doing that. Yeah.
Question, last year we had 9 participants. This number here is if we accept all 19.
Yeah.
So, you know.
That will not be the recommendation.
Okay.
I can tell you that.
Yeah. What's in the working model and assumptions would be a modest increase, potentially. It could be, it could go to 0. You could decide this is no longer a priority for the county. It could go to 0 and push pause on it for a year or two. You could do any range of things from 0 to whatever limit you'd like to. All right. Okay. I wanted to talk a little bit about education funding. We know historically we've talked about a lot about the schools, public schools, and we've talked a little bit about SBCC. And I think it makes sense to look at them together since their main function is to provide high-quality education for county residents, whether you're K through 12 or whether you're older than that and you're preparing for the workforce. We know that a lot of the really great jobs that are coming into the county as a result of the work that Chris Plate is doing to bring in companies like API expansion. Those are trades that require high levels of skills, and a lot of those folks are products or are going to SBCC to gain those technical skills, and so they're a wonderful resource for us. This chart, I wanted to just give you a history of the funding, the direct funding or the operational amount that we've given SBCC over the years. You'll see that the amount for FY20 adopted and the FY21 working number, it's the same number, it's flat. And so again, this is only possible to keep their funding flat because they've agreed that they can handle their capital needs in FY21 like they did in FY20. So that's why you see that as a flat number there. I also wanted to show the debt service there. County Manager Watson mentioned that they have buildings coming online and other buildings are planning, and that's the increase in debt service here in 21 for those buildings. This is schools down here. We break their funding components into 2 categories: operations funding and then capital. And these resources come available from their portion of the countywide tax rate. And you'll see the growth amounts here. And then this is a section that shows their debt service and how that's grown over the years also. And now that their debt service is broken into two components. One is a portion that's in the general fund, and their general fund debt service is how we refer to it. And also what's in the countywide debt service fund. Now, we talked last time we were together about the requirement that we have to dedicate 30% of all sales tax to school debt, and this is the portion that it goes to here that it funds. Again, Manager Watson mentioned SPCC being flexible in their funding requests. We certainly appreciate that. Just a comment about school debt. School debt makes up 95% of the general fund's debt service obligation. So the vast majority of debt that we carry is on behalf of the schools and their growth, just for context. And then they have the majority of the voter-approved debt, which is more recent debt that we have. That we're transitioning debt from the general fund as we pay it off, and then new debt that comes on board into the voter-approved debt fund. And the idea around that debt fund is that as bonds are approved and we take on debt, that will calculate the increase of that debt fund that's needed through the tax rate to fund that increase. So if we know that's going to go up by $2.7 million next year, well, that would require a 1 penny increase in the countywide tax rate to fund that increase that has been agreed on by the court. I wanted to show just two slides that I've taken out of the Board of Education's funding request for the year. I think that's what Lynn handed out to you. This is the first slide that shows the value of the penny that they're using, which is what we're using also. We shared that with them. They're making the assumption that the tax rate of 44.5 would be what they're working with. They also included true-up funding, $1.23 million. That's the amount that they just received for the end of the last fiscal year. That true-up funding is only available when we collect more revenue than we budgeted. So if we collect 101% of revenue in the school fund, then that 1% in the next fiscal year is made available to them to supplement their capital program. If you remember back to our joint meeting in February, there was some discussion about why that number has decreased over the past few years, and it's based on collections, but also since it's the net proceeds above the budget. If they get less on the back end, then that means they got more on the front end. So they've received more in their direct operations, and so there's less to receive at the end of the year of what would come in later. So I just want to make the point that true-up funding is not a guaranteed funding source. If we don't collect 100% and we would fall short, then that amount available for true-up would be zero or would be negligible. So I wanted to point that out. So they're looking at the $124 million as their tax rate yield, and then they're including the true-up funding of 1.23 for a total of $125.5 million to fund their operations. And in this slide, I'll show you how we break it up, how they receive it, which is through an operating allotment and a capital allotment. In FY20, they have $102.9, $103 million for operating, and $20.2 in capital. They requested an increase of $8 million for operating, a slight decrease for capital. For FY21, this is the amount that they showed for their anticipated yield or anticipated proceeds, and the deficit there is $5.1 million.
Wait, quick question.
Sure.
What has the schools being out for a couple months? What effect has that had on them? A savings effect or
I couldn't tell you specifically. I really don't know the specifics of how their operations are impacted.
is that maybe a conversation manager you could have with Mr. Boyd?
My conversations with the superintendent is there are no savings.
With 2 months of being
That's the explanation. There are no savings.
Well, in the opening comments from Ms. Merrill here, she's stating there's 41,000 students. And past years, it was 42,000. So and the budget keeps growing. So, you know, I'd like to understand, you know, where the growth is if you're losing students.
Yeah, the projection was we'd lose 5,000 students until 2025, I believe. I don't know if that's changed or not, but that's going along with some of the projections.
It's not shown on this slide, but it's in your packet of information that you were given just a few minutes ago. When you look through that, you'll see that there, let's say it's another $450,000, Michelle, that's going toward charter schools.
Yes,
Yeah.
which is, I mean,
So
and
about-
you'll all know, that's very modest, actually, from what it's been in
Yeah.
years
So
past.
a little over $9 million going toward charter
In
schools.
total.
Did we recognize any savings? I know we haven't laid off any employees, correct? Since the COVID.
We didn't work some of our part-time employees, we didn't work because we didn't have work for them.
But we did institute a hiring freeze, and we eliminated all travel and training for the remainder of the year, which is about $3 million in
Right.
savings is what we would anticipate from that.
So if we did 3 million, I think there would be some substantial.
I'm told that basically the only place that they would have saved or could have saved was in the gas for the operating of the buses.
We are going to follow up with some questions, so if you, I've jotted down a couple questions here, and we have some of our own that we'll follow up, and so we will put that in writing and ask for a response. So if there are any others, after you review their entire package, let me or Blake or Mark know, so we can get those to them to get those responses.
Well, I know that, I was told that if bus drivers, for example, if they weren't working, they couldn't be paid. That has to be a financial impact.
And I think there was some direction to pay them. I think that came from
Oh,
the state.
I don't know. That's
Yeah,
what I-
think
that's-
that came
that's
from
what
the
the
state.
Yeah,
We can
that-
ask for some clarification on that.
And that may be some of the problem is state requirements versus local.
And they received $1.4 million,
$1.9 million,
$1.9 million from the state to help offset some of the COVID impact.
They got that at the very beginning of COVID. There was, I guess it was the first version of the CARES Act. There was some money that came down specifically for education. So they got that early on. They got that before we were made aware of any county funding for COVID costs. So that's one of the questions too, is how those dollars were spent.
Was it a double dip for paying?
Because that clearly is additional revenue.
Custodians and teacher assistants, would there not have been, well,
We'll have to
You're
ask
gonna-
that,
you're
we'll have
gonna
to
ask.
ask that question, but the response that we've gotten informally at this point is no savings.
We will have a formal written response, or we go to
We
come to
we
budget
will,
time.
we will provide them with a list of questions and we'll anticipate a response.
Did we also not communicate to them the strategy of a flat budget?
We did.
Like, this may be a simple question, and you may have already shared the information.
Those are my favorite questions.
But you just showed their budget, maybe on the previous slide. Do we have that same number, those same simple numbers for county operations operating budget and county operations capital budget?
We can definitely break them out that way.
And I simply make that point to, we're all talking about the circumstances that we're in and have come through, the need to be fiscally conservative and responsive to the taxpayer. And I don't even have to get out my calculator. When you got 100 million and 8 million, that looks like an 8%, darn near 8% increase in operating to me. So I would just like to know the managers or the county's business in terms of our overall operating budget and its potential percentage increase, and our capital the same way. So
I think that's a,
what's good for the goose is good for the gander, is my point.
sure. That's a, I'm sorry, Mark, you guys have something?
I know we talked about that, staff has talked about that same number. Is that included in?
Yeah, if we go back to.
It's back, our operation numbers in there, right there.
The 1.5%, that's the total growth of all county expense, well, general fund expense from 20 to 21. So these are our revenue numbers, but that will build our expense up to that revenue cap. So we would expect to grow at 1.5% over the year compared to what you just explained.
Thank you.
These are the major categories that they've outlined. You'll see this in the presentation, what's driving their budget increase request. We mentioned a few of them already. And next. So this is a summary of budget assumptions for the county budget. Again, the working assumptions. And this is where, when we go through this is where I would ask if you have seen anything on here that's part of the process or part of the plan or part of all that's going into developing this budget that is misaligned to your priorities or your strategies, or there's something that you were hoping to see today that we didn't show you. Please let us know so we can react to it, so we can deliver to you on June 1st a budget that meets your needs and represents the vision of the county manager also. Again, here's the piece you asked Chairman Simpson also. A total general fund increase in expense of 1.5%. Again, a decrease in use of unassigned fund balance to 1.65, and that's based on that's all that we have. That's all that's available to use. The $500,000 that we're pulling out of our sales tax receipts to go in to fund the new fire districts. We're maintaining a. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. You're right. This is SPCC. Thank you, Mark. This is their request for their operating expenses for
Our negotiated increase.
The revised request. Yeah. We're maintaining a commitment to merit pay for employees. Transitioning to a longer-term sustainable funding model for county fire departments, going to the 80-20 for the more urban districts, and then 60-40 for the more rural. And that's been a long time coming, so I know I'm excited to see how that plays out. Fully funding capital needs and facility replacement, redesigning the community partner program, a modest service enhancement increase to targeted areas of strategic importance to the county. And again, the majority of that would come from realignments from funding already existing to higher priority areas. And the manager will carefully consider the Union County Public School funding request and prepare clarifying questions to the Board of Education to hopefully get some insight on that to share with you before the first. And the last point that I'm probably beating a dead horse here, the overall goal for this budget year, to reflect the comments of Chairman Simpson, to be fiscally conservative, to keep an eye on if we are suffering a revenue shortfall in this limited revenue environment that we're in, then county residents are also feeling the same pinch. So we want to be mindful of their pocketbooks and their wallets and keep our tax rate flat for that purpose as well for this year. So, Mr. Commissioner.
When are we going to be going over the public works budget?
I only included the general fund budget for this presentation. I don't know if we have.
You'll get that as part of the manager's recommendation, and then we can schedule time if you need additional time to go over that between the time you get the budget and budget adoption.
Go back. I just want to make mention of our appreciation to Sheriff and his staff in working through the budget. A lot of good conversations and support from the sheriff, understanding what the funding shortfalls are overall, and his commitment to operate basically on a flat budget for next year. Same operating budget he had this year.
And he's got the RNC to deal with.
And, right. So he has really been a good partner in this process, and I want to publicly say how much I appreciate his efforts in helping that.
He was really one of the first ones to come forward and offer to make some budget revisions. So without that effort, we couldn't work on this well right now. Thank you. Now, the next steps, just for calendar-wise, today is our budget workshop. We're hoping to have a draft of the budget document. This is Friday, that probably will be Monday, to get a draft to share with the manager, including his budget message, to hopefully deliver the budget book to you on Friday the 29th in anticipation of the presentation of the proposed budget on June 1st, which is our Monday meeting. So that's what we're working towards. Our process has become condensed because of the pandemic, but we're going to work hard to try and meet those targets for you so we can get everything that we need to, with the goal of adopting on the 15th. And of course, we have to do that by before July 1, so we're working towards that goal to get any clarifying questions or any feedback from you of any changes you'd like to see before we go too far forward, because the window to make those changes is getting shorter and shorter as we go forward. So, with that, I appreciate your time and your patience.
Any questions, comments? We hear you on the public works budget. Anything else that any board members want to see, or comments you have about the information that we've been presenting?
I don't know if it's 1 year under my belt, but everything clicked a lot better this year. I did notice that Chris added another bucket.
I did. Didn't add any project, just added a different bucket.
Yeah.
You can look, it's okay.
Gotta watch them buckets, you know.
You gotta fill the one.
Okay, all right.
On behalf of the board, I'd just like to say how much I appreciate the information. And it may be condensed into an hour and a half, but I know the time and effort it takes in putting all those numbers together and synchronizing them and bringing it to something we can understand. So appreciate that. And if there's no further questions from the board or the manager, or comments from the manager, I will move that we adjourn. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Have a great day.
All right.